Half-Life is really interesting to me, not just as a game but as a phenomenon, because there is this perfect synergy between what Half-Life itself is and its impact on the gaming landscape. Because just as Half-Life the game itself rewrote the rules of shooters, so did Half-Life the phenomenon for video game development and marketing. This is gonna be a steamy one, so buckle up and let's get into it. It can't be understated how much of a hit Half-Life 1 was and what kind of impact it had even a year before it was out, and as we learned later on, even before the game itself was actually good. It was reprogrammed pretty much from scratch a year before its 1998 release, and I think in part due to that, it managed to produce 3 different kinds of demos that don't feature the same content, and 2 of them don't even feature content that's present in the final game. And all this confusion happened before the 1998 release, and things only got more complicated from there. Valve had partnered with Sierra Entertainment to publish Half-Life, and through a strange legal agreement, Valve and Sierra ended up co-owning the Half-Life IP, but not really. Meanwhile this was happening, mods started popping up, and Valve didn't really see why those mods shouldn't be official games, so they started buying mods like Day of Defeat and started developing their own mods internally themselves, and also making them official products. Sierra wasn't just sitting around either, and they contracted Gearbox to make an expansion to Half-Life, Opposing Force, and then another expansion but for the Sega Dreamcast, which was then cancelled a couple of weeks before it released, and then Gearbox was contracted to make a PS2 port instead, but not include the new expansion Blue Shift that they were working on. No, instead they included a new expansion that was called Half-Life Decay, which was a 2-player co-op game that featured puzzling elements that we wouldn't see again until the release of Portal, and it starred 2 lady scientists that were kind of mentioned in Half-Life 1, and they did some things. But back in the PC world, Blue Shift ended up in the Half-Life Umbrella compilation thing, and it was such a big deal that it was included that it says right here on the box that it's so cool that it's included. This box is also interesting, I suppose, because it has Counter-Strike as Half-Life Counter-Strike, because Sierra demanded that it be titled like that to be better marketed. Because if I bought something that was called Half-Life Generations, and one of the discs in the compilation didn't have Half-Life branding on, I would just throw that fucking trash in the ocean and not give it a second thought. Yeah, I don't know why they thought the name Half-Life would be important on the branding. So I got a bit off track, but anyways, before, during and after all this, a mod team makes a Quake 1 multiplayer mod that then becomes a Quake 2 multiplayer mod before becoming a Half-Life 1 single player mod that is then shown off at the 1999 Half-Life 1 Mod Expo, and it gains the attention of Sierra, who then contracts the team to make it into a full game, Half-Life Gunman, which has about as much to do with Half-Life as Half-Life Counter-Strike. The team develops the game and then immediately shuts down the studio before the game actually hits store shelves, because during this, Valve in the final months of Gunman's development made a play to get control of the Half-Life license, which they did successfully, and by extension also the license to the Gunman game, which had been renamed Gunman Chronicles, but was still very obviously wearing the Half-Life style of branding. And what did Valve choose to do with this new license that they acquired when they acquired their own game? Nothing. The game is abandonware and they make no mention of it anywhere, and unlike the mods that they had some sort of involvement in themselves, Gunman has never become a part of the Gold Source or Source lineup, unlike Ricochet, Day of Defeat, Team Fortress, etc. Is it because it's bad? I don't know. Let's have a look. But how will we have a look? Well, we could pirate it up and just download it. I'm sure it's readily available online, but there is a way. A legal way. The legal way, of course, is to order it on eBay, wait 30 days for the low print physical, hook up my disk drive, which I have literally never used, and then install it physically with a disk. And it makes noise when the disk spins. It's actually kind of nostalgic. After successful installation, Windows started screaming that it was kinda incompatible and not totally installed right. But I have seen this before, and it's common with games that are this old, and it will work fine. Ish. Yeah, I don't know why it's windowed, it's not supposed to be, and I'm sure it's supposed to run better than this. Because this is awful. Okay, pirating it is. Gunman Chronicles, despite being a product officially owned by Valve, is actually on ModDB. And the cool thing about the mod being on ModDB is that it's a Steam mod, which means that it will come with a bunch of quality of life improvements, like modern graphic card support, widescreen, controller options, etc. It's good stuff, and as you can see, it runs a lot better than the physical version did running in software mode, which was the only mode it would run in. But is it good? The game itself? It's very impressive for what it is, how it was made and when it was made. It features an intro sequence like Half-Life, but it plays around with gravity, showing other characters walking on what appears to be vertical surfaces. When the shuttle we're on finally docks, we're guided through a training exercise that learns us the ropes of the game. There is of course the basic stuff like movement controls, but also the more interesting stuff that Half-Life didn't have, like every firearm having several modes of fire, like rockets can be homing rockets and pistols can be changed to fire full auto or bursts, etc. The story itself is also more engaging than Half-Life, I would say. About 5 years back, a general, your commanding officer, heroically sacrificed himself in a decisive battle, and he has become a bit of a martyr and a patron saint of the army. However, after a supposed Xenom attack, Major Archer and a squadron of soldiers are sent to a planet to launch a counterattack, but then the squadron is very quickly wiped out by an unknown force, and the sole survivor, Major Archer, learns that the general is very much not dead and that he blames Major Archer for his sacrifice, and that he is out for revenge. There is naturally a bit more to it, but it's a very interesting opening, and it's a fun way to put the player into that lone survivor mode that Half-Life also did. The gameplay itself is fine. I initially played it on medium difficulty, but the game doesn't seem to have actually been balanced for that, and the guns kinda felt underwhelming, and they didn't have that oomph to them, as I couldn't see them do noticeable damage on the enemies when I fired on them, but switching to easy fixed that, even though it dented my fragile man pride. It's also long, if you like that, about 40 hours. I would say more about it, but if you've played Half-Life Opposing Force Blue Shift, you know what you're getting into. It's that, but with cowboy makeup and a few advancements. It's good, and it's weird that Valve hasn't made it available like they have everything else. For fuck's sake, they allowed Hunt the Freeman to exist. That was a cursory look at a Half-Life 1 expansion that existed for the briefest moment in time. And if you like Half-Life, Opposing Force, Blue Shift, all that good stuff, you should absolutely give it a go. But unless you're planning on booting up your Windows 1998 computer and playing it like that, then, obviously, rock on, brother. But unless you're planning on playing it like that, you should check out the mod on ModDB. And you shouldn't feel bad about checking out the mod on ModDB, because if Valve gave a shit, they would have removed it. And they've had seemingly over a decade to remove it, and they haven't. So they don't give a shit. Which technically makes it vaporware in a lot of countries, including mine, so if you're from Denmark, then go super nuts. It's completely legal. And also, if you're not from Denmark, still download it, because Valve doesn't give a shit. Until next time, bye bye.